This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning. This is Stuart Address for Ask a Lawyer, May 27th, 2022. I hope you've all had a nice week and have been able to avoid the monkeypox.
Monkeypox.
That's right. Can you imagine?
What will be next, though?
I don't know. The Trump pox?
Turkey pox? Oh, redundant. I'm sorry.
And a new producer is walking in behind you.
Ah, hey.
I have the good fortune of having two producers, one for 60 seconds and the other for 60 minutes.
There you go.
All right. Anyway, while they're getting set up, let me pose a riddle to you all. How many lawyers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Oh, now if I answered that, you'd sue me.
Well, that's a good answer. Do you have a number in mind?
Let's see. Two.
And why two?
Well, one to litigate that the other person is going to actually turn the light bulb to screw it in. Yeah.
Okay. Cliff says two. One to litigate and one to actually turn the light bulb in. Well, let's count them up. One to get the light bulb. One to get the ladder. One to read the instructions on the ladder. To tell the other about any product liability issues, any failure to warn issues. One to climb the ladder, another to reach in to screw the light bulb, and a few more inserted here and there to warn about all the potential pitfalls and discuss assumption of the risk. So a lot of lawyers screw in a light bulb, which is why I don't screw in light bulbs.
Well, unless you're Italian, and then it would take 3 Italians to move the ladder around while you're standing on it.
Greg, who has just sat down and put his headphones on, says the answer is 3. He said 3. I don't know. I think he said 3 to move the ladder around while you're standing on it.
Yeah, but that's
Italians.
Only if you're Italian. Yeah.
Only if you're Italian. All right. Well, with that little bit of levity or lack thereof, that's lawyers speak. Let me pose a question. Let me give you folks some numbers, and we will work ourselves into the topic. We are basically approaching the end of 5 months in May in 2022. Memorial Day is just around the corner on Monday. That will be 5 months. And so far we have in the US of A 199 mass shootings. I repeat, 199 mass shootings in 5 months. And that is a rate of 40 a month, more than one a day. Have we become so numb to it that we don't realize there's a mass shooting in the US every day? Well, maybe we have. Let me just give you some recent illustrations. I know you'll be aware of a couple of these, but let me give you some recent illustrations. May 25th, 4 people were shot, including 2 teenagers, while on the way to a prom in Philadelphia. None were killed, 4 were injured. The day prior, May 24th, we're all familiar now with the shooting at the elementary school in Texas, where 22 are dead, 18 are injured. Of course, the dead, with the exception, I think, of 2 teachers, are mostly 9, 10-year-olds who went to school that day never anticipating they might not come home, whose parents sent them to school that day never anticipating they might not come home. And lest those simply be numbers, let's take a moment to think about it. Think about the impact on all those families, each and every one. Think about the ripple effects of all the people in those families that are in grief, that are in agony. Think of the loss of 20 children, what their lives might have become. Who would have solved the next pandemic? Who might have uncovered mysteries of the universe? We'll never know. And the reality is, in a few days, we'll never remember. But each of the families that have been impacted will remember each and every day for the rest of their lives. That's reality. May 23rd in Cleveland, 5 people were shot during a memorial service. None were killed, 5 were injured. Also on May 23rd, in North Charleston, South Carolina, 5 people were injured in an early morning shooting at a nightclub. The day prior, on May 22nd, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, 5 were killed at a public housing complex. May 22nd as well, in Alabama. 4 were killed when a man fatally shot his 2 teenage daughters and his wife before shooting himself. May 21st, Tacoma, Washington, 4 injured in a drive-by shooting. May 21st in Indiana, 2 killed, 3 injured in a shooting which occurred at a home. Oh, May 20th, we've got 3 for May 20th. San Bernardino, California, a shooting at an after prom party. 1 killed, 9 injured. May 20th, New Orleans. 4 people were shot, 1 killed in the Holy Cross neighborhood. And also on May 20th, in Kissimmee, Florida, 1 was killed, 3 were injured in a drive-by shooting in front of a grocery store. I can go on and on through 199 of these. I won't, because it would go beyond the time limits of the show. But let's add up 2022 alone for 5 months. 199 mass shootings, 221 dead, 790 injured, 1,011 either killed or injured in 5 months. That's 200 a month that are being killed or injured by mass shootings. Now, I was moved this week to post on my personal Facebook page, and these are available, public postings available to everybody, clips from two, I'll call them speeches, from two very different people in very different walks of life who both had a similar reaction, particularly to the shooting in Texas. One was Senator Chris Murphy of New Jersey, who spoke on the floor of the Senate and said, when is this going to stop? When are we going to care enough to do something about it? And the coach of the Golden State Warriors, NBA, Steve Kerr, who before one of the games of his team's NBA playoffs, when he had the required media conference for all coaches before these playoff games, he walked in, sat down, and said, I am not taking any questions on basketball. And instead, he spoke from the heart about the shootings in Texas and the absurdity of our collective failure to force our representatives in Congress to take action, particularly when 90% of Americans agree on at least certain types of action which should be taken.
You know, Steve Kerr had more than one reason. The Texas thing, I think,
Yes.
the push, but his daddy was murdered. He was on assignment with the University of Arizona at the University of Beirut, and his daddy was murdered on that day back in the 90s. So,
I had read that, and for those on Facebook, Greg is mentioning that Steve Kerr had another reason for this to have impacted him so much. His father, on the very same day, many years ago, while he was at the University of Beirut on assignment, was killed in a shooting. So as I said at the top of the show, the ripple effects that get sent out into the universe to crash when we least expect it. Now, I don't know Steve Kerr. I don't even really know the Golden State Warriors. But I suspect, having lost my father about 12 years ago, that Steve Kerr had made his peace with the fact that his father was gone, that there were days when he would think more about his father than others, holidays, birthdays, special days. There were other times his father might have popped into his mind for one reason or another. Maybe something he wished his father could know that would have made his father particularly happy. Maybe something he wished he could ask his father for advice. But this also was a ripple effect that smacked him, as I like to say, upside the head. He wasn't expecting it, but it hurt. And it propelled him to refuse to take basketball questions, which under any other situation, the NBA probably would have fined him for that. I don't think under this situation they would dare. But instead made his statement about our failure to act in this country and the power of the NRA, and proceeded to take questions on that. Now, we sometimes like to say, when it comes to entertainers, actors, singers, whatever, who make comments about, public issues, some like to say they should shut up and do their jobs. We don't need to hear from them about politics. Others welcome their comments, as important as anybody else's, and with the platform they have, more important that they use it for good reasons. I agree with the latter. I like, even when I disagree with the position, I believe that those who have the privilege of a platform, and I have a tiny one on this show, but those who have even bigger platforms should occasionally use them when necessary to try to influence public opinion, or as the framers of our Constitution would have phrased it, influence the body politic. What was the body politic? It was all of us. It wasn't representatives or senators. The body politic were the citizens. Why shouldn't we be involved? We're supposed to be involved. It's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, with hopes that it shall not perish from this earth. So, with that little introduction, let's talk a little bit about mass shootings, Second Amendment, and gun control. And let's see if we might not come to some agreement near the end on some issues. And I welcome you folks to call in 772-340-1590. Now, let's look briefly at the origins of the Second Amendment. The American Revolution had started in part because of taxation issues. The colonists protested against what they perceived as unfair and oppressive treatment, while the British response was to stop the importation of firearms to the New World. In retaliation, colonists began to smuggle guns in from the continent, meaning the rest of Europe, stockpiling extras for a day when they would need them to fight the increasingly vindictive crown. The Second Amendment states, in part, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, end quote. Now, as they like to say these days, and you want to unpack that, the lawyer is going to try to deal with that. We're looking at three keys there: well-regulated militia, security of a free state, right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You can't look at just one alone, like right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what the NRA does. Over and over and over and over, you hear the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They ignore two other parts of the amendment, conveniently in my view. And all three have to be viewed in juxtaposition of the others to come to an understanding of the Second Amendment. The framers had just endured a long war against a well-regulated militia, a war that would have ended entirely differently if the people had been unarmed, and the framers envisioned the possibility of future oppression of the people at the hands of an overreaching government. Hence, the Second Amendment. Well, in this backdrop, the framers of the Bill of Rights adapted the wording of the amendment from nearly identical clauses in some of the original 13 state constitutions, states which had been colonies. During the Revolutionary War era, militia referred to groups of men, yes, men, who banded together to protect their communities, towns, colonies, and eventually states once the United States declared its independence from Great Britain in 1776. There are two theories of what militia meant in the context of the framers drafting the Second Amendment. The crux of the debate is whether the amendment protects the right of private individuals, you and I, to keep and bear arms, or whether it instead protects a collective right that should be exercised only through formal militia units. Those who argue it is a collective right, not an individual right, point to the well-regulated militia clause in the Second Amendment and argue that the right to bear arms should be given only to organized groups like the National Guard, a reserve military force that replaced state militias after the Civil War, etc. On the other side are those who argue that the Second Amendment gives all citizens the individual right to own guns in order to protect themselves. Let's look at the time the US Constitution was being written, the US was overwhelmingly rural. There weren't many big cities. Oh yeah, we did have Boston, we had New York, Philadelphia, I can name a few others, but it was overwhelmingly rural. And the frontier, with its wild animals and Native American tribes, not all of whom were hostile, but many were, existed neck and neck with coastal settlements. Families hunted for their protein sources, and each small hamlet protected itself collectively from robbery or worse. Citizens needed guns to survive. Because gunpowder was flammable and guns expensive, firearms for each village were kept in a centralized location. It may have been your gun, but it may have been kept at the firehouse, not in your home. Thus, as well as the legacy of the Revolutionary War, we look at the state of affairs that the founding fathers had to associate gun ownership with the idea of a well-regulated militia, where armies were federal matters. Militias protected local settlements. And during the Jacksonian era, the first collective right interpretation of the Second Amendment arose in the United States Supreme Court case of State versus Buzzard in 1842. I'm sorry, where this is not the United States Supreme Court, my mistake. It's the Arkansas Supreme Court, where it adopted a militia-based political right reading of the Second Amendment. So it goes way back. Now, before I go on to the next subtopic, let's look at, as teachers like to say, let's review. We're concerned about the British. They vastly outnumber us. They have ships. They have cannons. They have lots of good armaments. What do we got? A lot of broken down muskets. One-shot muskets. You know, that thing you see on TV shows and movies. They put a ball in, they put some gunpowder in, they stamp it in really hard, they shoot, then they have to do it all over again before they can fire another shot. I dare say that the automatic weapons of today, in 1 second, fire more shots than any of these militiamen could fire in a day. That's saying something. So we're looking to protect ourselves from others, from government oppression from within or without. And we're hunting for food as opposed to going to Publix. This is the context in which the Second Amendment was written. And that simply cannot be denied. Not by fake news, not by cherry-picking interpretations of history. It's the facts. So let's next look at guns of the revolution. Man, let me tell you something. I am not the person to talk about guns of any type. I don't know from them. I've never held one. I've certainly never fired one. I hope I never do. Matter of fact, to give you a quick aside of the dangers of guns, my brother-in-law, a couple months ago, I think I may have mentioned this on another show, was at a friend's house, his best friend's house. They'd grown up since they were kids together. They were both very wealthy. And they were over at the friend's house, you know, think of 2.5 men overlooking the ocean. And the friend wanted to show my brother-in-law a new gun that he had purchased. Okay, sounds reasonable. What proceeded was not reasonable. Instead of bringing it out, maybe in its box, opening it up and saying, here, look at the gun. He came out with the gun in hand and went, bang, bang. It was a joke, but there was a bullet in the gun. Right into my brother-in-law's brain. Dead. You say that was an accident? Yeah, it was. How many of these accidents occur in the US every year? My niece lost her dad. Will never, ever have her dad. You want to know something? She's going to be getting a good sum of money. But she's never, ever going to speak to her father again. Her father won't be there when she gets married. Her father won't be there when she has her first child. Her father won't be there in times of trouble to lend a word or a helping hand. That's her reality. guns. Let's look briefly at guns of the Revolution. As galloping express riders and ringing church bells spread across New England during the early hours of April 19th, 1775, thousands of farmers and tradesmen carrying a variety of firearms poured out of their homes and headed towards Lexington and Concord to intercept the British Army column approaching from Boston. America's war for independence had begun. Yet, despite their deeply held convictions, these provincials felt they had no realistic chance to win. How could they? England was the greatest fighting force that the earth had ever known. In opposition against that finest army and navy of the world, the colonists possessed no trained armed forces, no established central government, no financial reserves, and no industry to supply their effort. In the beginning, the only existing American military groups were the individual militia systems of each colony. Now let's think about that. An organized group of people, a militia. What does that sound like in modern days? Sounds like the local police, the sheriffs, maybe the state police, the state National Guard. Those sure sound like local, well-regulated militias of the colonial days. The only difference is we no longer need every male citizen of the hamlet to run to some centralized location with their guns, their muskets. We have organized militias that are well regulated and well armed. So in that backdrop, what do we say about the individual right to bear arms? Each member of the colonies was equipped with a firearm plus a bladed backup arm, such as a short sword, a belt axe, or bayonet. Yet, unlike the mother country's own militia regulations, in which the authorities controlled the arms and stored them together in a secured central location between muster days, each American had to provide his own arms. The way it was, not the way it is. As late as 1778, General von Steuben wrote of George Washington's line regiments following his arrival at Valley Forge in February, quote, "The arms were in horrible condition, covered with rust, half of them without bayonets, many from which a single shot could not be fired, muskets, carbines, fowling pieces, and rifles, seen in the same company in disrepair." This was the era in which the Second Amendment was contemplated. And with that, we have Pat on the line. Hello, Pat.
Hello.
How you doing?
Was anybody charged in your brother-in-law's shooting? Was there any
yes.
foreign substance, and was there drinking or smoking involved? Also, when you started your show going on with the shootings, that sounded good, but I would say over half of them were gang-related. What did we call them now in the city of Chicago, Baltimore, New York? You know, just for the fun of it, they go around riding and shooting.
Yep. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, like drive-by shootings type thing.
Yeah. But I mean, there's the gangbangers or whatever.
Yeah,
It has nothing to do with what happened in Texas.
it has nothing to do with the manner in which what happened in Texas, but we still have essentially mass shootings of varying different types. Not just school shootings, not just grocery store shootings, not just church and synagogue shootings. But you're right, that's a different type of shooting.
It's happened because the same children are out there shooting, getting caught, fingerprinted maybe, and then put back out on the street. I think that's a liberal thing.
I wouldn't say it's a liberal thing, because I wouldn't be agreeing that they should be put out on the street.
Was anybody charged?
Well, yeah, I'll answer your questions. First, for the people on Facebook, Pat is commenting that a number of the shootings that I mentioned at the top of the show were sort of these gang-related, let's go out and have some fun type shootings. And he's correct. My point was simply that we've had a number of what the FBI defines as mass shootings. He also asked about my brother-in-law, and what I just mentioned, was anybody charged? Yes, his friend was initially charged with manslaughter while the police continued to investigate, and I guess will determine whether or not to up the charge to second-degree murder. It certainly wasn't first-degree murder. There was no intent to kill. Let's just leave it at, there was clearly no intent here. It was a stupid act by his best friend. Was there any drinking involved? My understanding is that there was some drinking involved, which makes the display of the gun even stupider. As I said, they were both fairly well off. And there will be a civil suit as well as whatever criminal action comes out of it. And my niece, will receive a nice sum of money, but I think anybody would tell you, George Floyd's family perhaps, keep the money. Give me my family member. I don't know anybody really who would have a different reaction to that. So thank you for your call. Thank you for listening. Now, let's also look at gun technology that existed at the time of the Second Amendment's enactment, of its drafting. The founding fathers wrote in an era where firearms were relatively simple, made from a single piece of metal, not terribly accurate in terms of marksmanship, and slow to load. Man, I wish I could say that 100 times. Slow to load, slow to load, slow to load. So what in the devil is the problem with regulating high capacity magazines? What is the problem with outlawing those devices, of which I'm so unfamiliar with guns, I don't remember the name, that enable a semi-automatic weapon to essentially become an automatic weapon? What is the problem with these types of common sense limitations? Can the NRA credibly argue that the Second Amendment's right to bear arms, however you want to interpret it, meant for the individual to have the right to have a weapon of mass destruction, when the colonialists of the time had one-shot muskets? If they had perceived the advance of technology one day in this manner, would they have written the Second Amendment the way they did? Given everything else they were trying to accomplish, one cannot reasonably say they would have. So, technological improvements such as interchangeable parts were not available in the United States until about 1800. The Industrial Revolution further ensured easier gun manufacturing, specifically by creating a grooved barrel, I understand them, I'm reading, called rifling. Otherwise, I would not have known what rifling meant. That improved accuracy. In the ensuing years, more improvements in gun making resulted in firearms that were precise, easy to use, and much more lethal than their Revolutionary War counterparts. And with that, we have Mark on line one. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Stuart. I've been listening to you this morning, and I just got to clear up a few things for you.
Sure.
As far as the Second Amendment goes, it's one sentence, the Second Amendment. The first part of the sentence explains the second part of the sentence to you. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the free state.
Right.
Okay. The well-regulated militia are the people. That's what the militia is. It's the people.
It was back then. Do you
Militia
really
group.
argue
Hold on a
that the
second.
well-regulated militia today is the people?
Yes.
What
Absolutely.
about the state police? What about the sheriff? What about Florida Highway Patrol? Aren't those the
About them.
regulated
About
militias
them.
of modern day?
But what about them? They're government organizations. The
They're
militia is
local
the
government
people.
organizations. They're not federal. That's the whole idea. The colonies
No.
have the right to
You're
protect
missing the
themselves.
point. Let's say, I mean, they wrote the Second Amendment just because of what was happening to them. Their government, the British people, were oppressing them completely. They even cut off their guns. I mean, if you can't get it with that, if they didn't have those guns, if they didn't start stashing those guns, there wouldn't be an America today.
See, I agree with you, but I have a completely different conclusion.
Go ahead.
Well, you've been listening to it. My conclusion is that was the intent back then, when that was the only way in which to protect each individual state. Now, we have created organized groups within our states that are the well-regulated militia. Well-regulated
No,
for sure.
You're still missing the point. So nowadays, let's say what happened in 17/6 happens now. Our government starts to oppress us.
It did on January 6th. A whole bunch of people tried to overthrow the government.
So in other words, though, what you're saying is if it was up to you, from what I'm gathering, you would have us all using one single-shot revolvers or
No, not at all.
that are not equal.
Not at all. No, not at all. I think our nation has a history of hunting. There are guns that should be available. There are rifles that should be available to individual citizens.
And you also
that's the argument of the right.
You could
Every time the left says gun control, that what we're saying is, let's come and take everybody's guns. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what anybody in modern day is saying.
You're not letting me speak. You said earlier.
Well, my show.
You said
Go
earlier
on.
that the people can convert a gun into an automatic weapon. That's not true. That's not true.
What happened in Las Vegas?
What's that?
What happened in Las Vegas?
Those are semi-automatic weapons. They're
No,
not.
but he had something that
Everybody
converted it
wants to
essentially into an automatic weapon.
What's
Now,
it-
I'll be honest,
can
I am
hear
too
you.
unfamiliar with guns to remember what it was called. But I do remember that after Las Vegas, there was an effort in Congress to ban those types of devices, which of course went nowhere, at least not in the Senate. Anyway, I thank you for your thoughts. I believe you have a right to them. I agree with your premises. I disagree with the conclusion you reach from them. And
What
that's my-
conclusion are you disagreeing with?
The conclusion that leads you to believe that every individual has the right to possess a howitzer.
No, see, there you go.
Maybe they should be able to possess their own tank.
That's what I said.
What about surface to air missiles? That's an arm.
Should be able
Should
to
a citizen be allowed to have their own surface to air missiles?
Overthrows us.
Thank you very much for listening and calling. I do appreciate it. So no, folks, let's, you know, in law school, professors would ask us a question and then we'd have to argue it. And professors would intentionally, at least in the first year, take us out so far on a limb until it collapsed. And that was their way of teaching us to think like a lawyer. So let's take this argument out to its natural extension. Does the NRA believe we should each have the right to surface-to-air missiles? I mean, it's a firearm, but we have the right to have it. Should we have the right to have an M1 tank? It has a great thing to shoot at the top of that tank, you know.
Yeah, the only problem with an M1 tank is that our HOA wouldn't allow it.
The HOA wouldn't allow it. That's a good one. You know, in 1789, muskets used gunpowder. It had to be packed into the barrel by hand. Reloading took time, and the firearms, the muskets, were prone to jamming. This, combined with the relative inaccuracy of the musket shot, meant that war, hunting, and personal defense were all relatively convoluted affairs. Over a century passed before the invention of bullets in 1882. Further changes streamlined both the composition and size of ammunition, and in tandem with the rise of automatic firearms, these advances in weaponry have made it much easier for a single gun to fire many rounds in a much shorter period of time. This is where we go from a premise that many seem to be able to agree with to differing conclusions. I look at why did the individual need guns back then? Why did the framers write the Second Amendment? Why does that one sentence start with a well-regulated militia being necessary for the common defense? It was a group right, not an individual right. It was a collective right. And it was necessary because everybody in the colonies had to protect their own little version of paradise. Now, that's not our job. It's the job of the police, whether we like the police or not. Now we have Charlie on line 1, so let's go to Charlie.
Wouldn't be a Friday unless I called, Stuart.
Okay, I'm happy you do call.
101st Airborne, Vietnam, jumped out of planes and all that stuff. More people are killed with fists and hammers and other objects in this United States and in the world, frankly, than with firearms. And any weapon, any pistol, rifle can be turned into an assault weapon. Boom, 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 just pull the trigger.
I'm sorry, say that last part again. I didn't hear it.
In other words, first off, I said more people are killed
by other types of things. Yeah.
Yeah, other weapons other than a firearm. And you always hear an assault weapon, AR-15. They're also hunting weapons. It's the most popular weapon. It used to be an M16 in Vietnam. That was automatic.
I don't know what you're hunting. I mean, prehistoric dinosaurs?
No, an AR-15 is also used as a hunting weapon, and that's a fact, Stuart.
Well, I can't dispute the fact because I'm so little of a gun person that, you know, I can't dispute that, but
Yeah. Well, you don't know about firearms because that wasn't your life, and it wasn't my life.
and I recognize your familiarity with firearms from serving in Vietnam. And let me tell you something, I say quite sincerely, thank you for your service, particularly in a war that you came back to a country that hated you.
I know.
You know, we're about to have Memorial Day, and I hope people take a moment during the barbecues to recognize what Memorial Day really stands for. You know, I have never touched a gun. I don't come from a military family. Yet I know the tens of thousands who have died fighting to protect our democracy. And so I respect that service, and I respect your opinion. But to say that, you know, more people die from devices
It's wrong.
other than guns, I agree. Maybe that's true.
Well, if we took weapons away from all the good guys, only the bad guys would have weapons.
I don't agree with that argument. If you make it tougher for the bad guys to have weapons, that's the goal.
All right, brother. Take care. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you very much. You take care. Okay, let's admit that it's a difficult issue. Being a difficult issue, the way to start tackling it is with the easy questions. Do we agree that you should be able to required to be registered to have a firearm? Do we agree that background checks of some type should be required? Do we agree that large capacity magazines should be prohibited? Whatever it is that we can agree upon, whatever it is that 90% of Americans agree upon, let's friggin' get it done already. And if our representatives won't do it, if our senators won't do it, get them the hell out of their job. This is Stuart Address for Ask a Lawyer. I'll be back next Friday. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show.
You've been listening to Ask a Lawyer right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, talking to Treasure Coast, webcaster of the world, and WSTU Stuart, Martin County's heritage station since 1954.